What if I told you that this morning, when you opened your eyes, stretched your body, and felt the weight of this world again, might be the very last time you ever wake up here? Not in a morbid sense, not in fear, but in awe. Because there comes a point in the journey of the soul where you no longer wake up to learn, but to remember. A point where you are not here to gather more karma or repeat old wounds, but to complete something sacred, something ancient. A divine closing of the circle you began lifetimes ago, and maybe, just maybe, this is that life. The one where it all comes together, the one where you finally walk your last path through this earthly terrain, not because you've escaped anything, but because you've embodied everything. That possibility might feel far away. It might feel impossible. But if you're honest with yourself, doesn't something about it resonate? Have you ever felt it? The strange sense that this life is different, that it has a kind of weight to it, not the heavy weight of burden, but the sacred weight of meaning, the kind that whispers in the quiet moments, there's something you're supposed to remember. Maybe it comes in waves, maybe it crashes down during the silence between breaths, or maybe it has stalked you for years, this feeling that you're not here just to survive, but to finish. The truth is, you've been here before, many times, in many bodies, many forms. Each time you incarnated, your soul stepped into a new costume, entered a new theater, and accepted the role. You've been the teacher and the student, the oppressor and the liberator. You've been mother and child, enemy and friend, lover and wanderer. But what if this role, the one you're playing now, is the final act? There are lives where you build karma, where you create entanglements and attachments and wounds that call for repair. But there are also lives, rare, crystalline lives, where you resolve them, where the soul no longer adds to the web but begins untangling it, slowly, gently, like threads in a tapestry, until only the pure pattern of truth remains. Some souls come here not to learn lessons anymore, but to embody what they've already mastered across centuries. They come to integrate, to unify, to live as the teaching itself. Could that be you? Look at your life, not the surface details, the job title, the family dynamics, the milestones. Look deeper, look at the moments that shaped you, the betrayals that didn't break you, the losses that didn't harden you, the heartbreaks that opened you wider instead of closing you down. That's not beginner energy. That's not a soul just getting started. That's ancient energy. That's the kind of soul who has already walked through fire and now walks with purpose. And maybe that's what you've been feeling all along, the closing of the loop. You see, there are clues, not in external signs, but in your internal landscape. In the way your ego begins to loosen its grip without being forced, in the way you no longer chase validation with the same desperation, in how compassion begins to flow effortlessly from you, how you see others not as separate, but as reflections of yourself. These aren't ordinary developments. They're the signs of a soul nearing completion. This life may not be glamorous. In fact, final lives are often simple, quiet, even unremarkable to the world's standards, because you're not here to prove anything. You're here to become everything you already are. No longer reactive, you respond. No longer asleep, you awaken. Not in a flash, but moment by moment, day by day, breath by breath. And through that sacred consistency, you begin to dissolve the old illusions that once defined you. So what happens when a soul reaches this point? When Earth no longer feels like a prison or a playground, but a temple? The energy begins to shift. Life becomes more reflective. You start to feel guided, not in the way of grand cosmic signs, but in subtle nudges, a feeling that you're being led gently by something higher. Your inner voice grows louder. Your preferences begin to fade. You find peace in letting go. And perhaps the biggest sign of all, you stop asking, "What do I want?" and begin asking, "What does life want through me?" If you've ever looked around at this world and felt a sense of finality, not in despair, but in clarity, you're not alone. You're not delusional. You're remembering that you came not to gather more pieces, but to return to wholeness. And isn't that why certain things no longer interest you the way they once did? The drama, the competition, the need to be right. All of it starts to fall away like old skin. Not because you've grown out of it, in an intellectual sense, but because you remember who you are beneath it. There is less resistance, less clinging, and in its place, a quiet kind of power emerges, not loud or performative, but unwavering. You may notice your relationships shift. The ones built on ego begin to fade, while those built on authenticity deepen. You begin attracting people who feel like soul companions, because they are. You may even feel a growing desire to serve, not for recognition, but simply because it's who you've become. Giving, listening, creating, guiding, not for applause, but because it's your nature now. There's also a sacred kind of loneliness in this stage. Not the loneliness of lack, but the loneliness of realization, because fewer and fewer people around you can relate to what you feel. But that, too, is part of the final path. A period of shedding, a space of solitude before the final integration. You are walking between worlds now, not quite fully in the human drama, but not fully detached either. It's a threshold, a sacred doorway, and you're standing in it. And maybe, just maybe, this is what makes this life so extraordinary, not because of what you achieve in the eyes of the world, but because of what you release, what you remember, what you complete. So the question remains, what if this is your last life? What if you will never again return to this planet in this form? Not because you've escaped anything, but because you've fulfilled everything. What if the entire wheel of lifetimes has been guiding you to this very moment, to this breath, to this choice? Not everyone gets to this point. Not every soul finishes the cycle, but some do. And if you're still listening, maybe you're one of them. And maybe this is the last time you'll ever have to wake up here, not as a burden, but as a blessing. What if I told you there once lived a man, an ordinary man by appearance, who could close his eyes, slip into silence, and access truths so profound they echoed across lifetimes? He didn't wear robes. He didn't seek fame. But what moved through him altered the spiritual landscape forever. He wasn't a guru in the traditional sense. He was quiet, humble, and deeply human. And yet, when he entered those trance-like states, it was as if the very fabric of the universe parted, revealing answers not just for those who came to him, but for you. Because what he uncovered wasn't just personal advice or vague spiritual poetry. It was a roadmap for the soul's journey, your journey. His revelations spoke of more than destiny. They spoke of design, of a cosmos where nothing is random, and everything is connected, especially the life you're living right now. Imagine being able to tune into something beyond this realm, not guessing, not speculating, but knowing. That's what he did. He tapped into what some call the Akashic records, a kind of divine memory bank containing every thought, action, and intention of every soul that has ever existed. And within this cosmic archive, he found the blueprints of lives, past, present, and yet to come. But why does that matter to you? Because the information that came through him wasn't just history. It was activation. It was a spiritual mirror meant to awaken something dormant within you. You see, this man didn't just talk about past lives as a concept. He described them in vivid detail, down to names, places, and soul agreements. He explained that your soul is eternal, and that your current life is one chapter in a much longer story. A story that you wrote with intention long before you arrived here. And maybe you're starting to remember parts of it. He spoke of reincarnation not as punishment, but as opportunity. He said that you, as a soul, chose to come here over and over, not because you were broken, but because you were becoming. Each life gave you new chances to experience love, to overcome fear, to learn forgiveness, to awaken compassion, to master selflessness, and to refine the light within you. And through this process, he said, the soul evolves, not in a straight line, but in spirals, returning again and again, until all lessons are embodied and all debts resolved. But here's the part that might shake you. According to what flowed through him, reincarnation isn't endless. It's not a trap, it's a curriculum. And like all curriculums, it has a graduation. That means, if you're here now, feeling the strange sense that this life carries a weight different from the others. If you felt the pull of something higher calling you home, it could be because you're standing near the edge of completion. He explained that karma, too, is misunderstood. It's not cosmic punishment, it's cause and effect woven through time. It's your soul creating situations that bring you face to face with yourself. It's a chance to respond differently, to choose love where you once chose fear. And when karma is fulfilled, when it has served its purpose, it dissolves. You don't carry it forever. You're not doomed to repeat. You can become free. So what does all of this mean for you? It means your challenges aren't random. It means the recurring patterns in your life, the same types of relationships, the similar wounds, the repeated emotional storms. They all have roots that may stretch beyond this single incarnation. But more importantly, it means you're not here to suffer under them. You're here to heal them, to break the loop, to walk through the fire not as a victim of fate, but as a soul remembering its power. This man's words revealed that within each soul lies a spark of the divine, what some call the higher self. And it's through aligning with this deeper essence that you begin to transcend the ego's game of survival and step into the soul's path of service and evolution. He spoke of divine timing, soul contracts, and energetic imprints carried across lifetimes. But at the core of every message was one central truth. You are not your personality. You are not your past. You are not your trauma. You are light, wrapped in temporary form. And that light is eternal. He taught that many people alive today are what he called old souls, beings who have incarnated through many ages, carrying wisdom etched in the silence of their hearts. These souls often feel like outsiders. They don't quite fit into the noise of modern life. They may feel pulled toward ancient teachings, drawn to mysticism, or driven to serve others, even when it makes no logical sense. They feel deeply. They question everything. And sometimes, they carry an ache they can't explain, a longing for something they've never seen in this life, but somehow remember. If you've ever felt that ache, then this isn't new information to you, it's recognition. He described the soul's journey as a path not only through time, but through vibration. Each life brings a new frequency to embody, a new layer of the divine to integrate. And as you rise in vibration, through forgiveness, through surrender, through love, you move closer to the source from which you came. And when the soul has remembered its oneness with that source fully, there is no need to return. This is not about escape, it's about completion. That's why his work matters. That's why what moved through him was never about creating a religion or offering dogma. It was about handing you a mirror so that you could see yourself more clearly, not as flesh and bone, but as a multidimensional being, undergoing the great spiral of remembrance. He revealed that some souls volunteer to return, even after completion, not because they must, but because they choose to assist others. These are the way showers, the guides, the quiet souls who radiate calm in chaos and speak light into darkness. They are not superior, they are simply remembering faster. And if this life feels like a calling to serve more than a pursuit of personal gain, you might be one of them. So, who was the sleeping prophet? He was a bridge, a reminder, a voice from beyond the veil reaching across time to say, you are not what the world told you, you are not lost, you are on track. And this life, this specific life, is sacred, not because of what you achieve, but because of what you fulfill. He didn't give you all the answers. He simply pointed you back to the questions you were born asking, the ones hidden beneath your daily thoughts. The ones that whisper to you in moments of silence, why am I really here? What am I supposed to become? And now, maybe you feel it, the stir in your soul, the knowing that what you're experiencing isn't random, it's orchestrated, not by fate, but by your own higher design. This isn't just another life. This is the life where you stop searching outside and start remembering within. Because the greatest revelation wasn't in the records he accessed. It's in you. Always has been Saman. What if I told you that the struggles you've endured, the heartbreaks, the betrayals, the moments where you questioned everything, weren't failures or punishments, but part of a sacred curriculum, that your soul didn't end up here by accident, and you're not merely surviving this life, but actually learning through it? What if every uncomfortable moment, every loss, and even every joy was part of a deeper lesson your soul signed up for before you were ever born? You see, this world isn't just a place you live in, it's a classroom, a living, breathing, often chaotic classroom designed with precision to shape your evolution. And while it may not come with desks and chalkboards, it offers something far more powerful, real experiences that carve wisdom into your spirit. Each challenge is like a spiritual exam, each moment of grace, a reminder of who you really are underneath the noise. You weren't sent here to be tested in the way humans often think of tests, harsh, punishing, or cruel. You were sent here to remember through experience. And Earth, with all its contrast and beauty and heartbreak, is one of the most advanced schools in existence. Because here, you don't just read about compassion, you learn it by holding space for someone else's pain. You don't simply study forgiveness, you're forced to practice it when someone wounds you so deeply, your ego wants to shut down completely. You don't theorize about unconditional love, you discover it by loving people who don't love you back. This place teaches through contrast, through intensity, through repetition. And while that may sound exhausting, it's actually brilliant, because repetition is how the soul integrates truth. It's not enough to hear spiritual wisdom once. Your soul returns to the same themes, the same dynamics, sometimes even the same people, across multiple lifetimes, until the lesson is no longer just known. It's lived. Think about your own life. What patterns keep showing up? What types of people do you keep attracting? What emotions seem to follow you through every chapter? These aren't random, these are assignments. Not in a punishing sense, but in a tailored, sacred sense. Your soul, in its infinite wisdom, chose these scenarios to awaken you, to stretch you, to dissolve what is false and reveal what is true, and it's not always gentle. In fact, Earth is a place where the lessons often come wrapped in difficulty. That's why some lives feel so dense, why some people are born into chaos, pain, or loss. Because sometimes, the greatest soul lessons require the deepest contrast. It's not about fairness in a human sense, it's about growth in a cosmic sense. But here's what they don't tell you. There's a graduation. You aren't meant to stay in this classroom forever. As your soul integrates what it came to learn, the lessons begin to change. The karmic intensity starts to lighten. You start to feel more like a conscious participant rather than a confused victim of life. And eventually, you reach a point where you're not here to accumulate more lessons, but to live them out, to become the teaching. That's the quiet milestone no one talks about. The moment when your life stops being a struggle to understand and starts becoming a dance of expression. You begin to live with awareness, you move with intention. You make choices from a space of alignment rather than reaction. And in doing so, you shift from being the student to being the embodied wisdom. But this doesn't mean you stop growing. Graduation from Earth's curriculum doesn't mean perfection. It means you've reached a level of wholeness, where you no longer need to incarnate here to learn the basics. You've moved beyond the cycles of revenge, blame, greed, and fear. You no longer need suffering to awaken compassion. You already live in that state naturally. You no longer need to be betrayed to understand forgiveness. You've forgiven preemptively. You no longer need to lose everything to realize who you are. You already know, even in stillness. The Earth School isn't easy, and you knew that before you came. Souls who incarnate here are some of the bravest, not because they want to suffer, but because they're willing to feel. To fully immerse themselves in the illusion of separation in order to remember unity from the inside out. You agreed to forget so that remembering would be real. That's how powerful you are. There are many dimensions of existence, many realms of learning, but Earth is unique. Here, time slows down. Lessons that take seconds in spirit form can take decades in physical form. Emotions hit harder, choices carry weight, and that's exactly what makes the transformation so profound. It's one thing to know you are love in a dimension where love is all that exists. It's another thing entirely to choose love here, in a world filled with fear, violence, division, and distraction. Choosing love here is the final exam, and you've likely been at this for longer than you realize. Most souls don't graduate after just one life. It takes many lifetimes to move through the full range of Earth's curriculum. You've been the one who caused pain and the one who received it. You've experienced wealth and poverty, health and sickness, power and powerlessness. And through it all, your soul has been collecting wisdom like a cosmic alchemist, turning every experience, no matter how dark, into light. So if this life feels strange, if it feels like the final pages of a long book, it may be because you might be finishing something, not because you're exhausted or ready to give up, but because you've fulfilled what you came to do. You've sat in all the classrooms, you've passed the exams, and now you're being called not to study, but to live the truth that's already in you. But here's the beautiful twist. Graduation isn't about leaving, it's about arriving. It's about arriving fully into your being, your presence, your authenticity. It's about no longer pretending to be asleep when you're wide awake. It's about serving not out of obligation, but from the overflow of your soul. It's about becoming a living, breathing reminder to others that Earth doesn't have to be suffering. It can be a sacred path, a mirror, a doorway. And once you graduate, the way you experience Earth begins to change. Time feels different. Relationships deepen. Priorities shift. You no longer crave status, you crave truth. You no longer chase achievement, you express essence. And strangely, you may even feel more peace in solitude than you ever did in the noise of the world. Graduation doesn't mean you ascend into the clouds. It means you ground your light here, in this body, in this life, in this moment. It means you become the teacher, not by preaching, but by being. And that kind of energy changes everything around you. It heals, it uplifts, it realigns others simply by existing in integrity. So if you feel like you're on the edge of something, if you've noticed that life feels more reflective than reactive lately, if you've been asking questions not out of confusion but out of clarity, you might already be at the threshold. This isn't the end, this is the turning point. Because once the soul finishes its time in Earth's classroom, it doesn't disappear, it rises. And in that rising, it reaches back with compassion, not to fix others, but to walk beside them until they remember, too. And now you know. You're not here by accident. You never were. You're walking through the final lessons of a long, sacred curriculum. And with each choice to love, forgive, surrender, or let go, you're not just passing the test, you're preparing to graduate. What if I told you that everything you've been through, every wound, every moment of stillness, every time you chose love over anger, has been guiding you to a threshold most people never even realize they're approaching? What if the reason life feels so different now isn't because you're lost, but because you're close to something complete? You see, not all souls are in the same phase of their journey. Some are just beginning, wrapped tightly in the dance of identity and reaction. Others are deep in the middle, cycling through karma, relationships, lessons, and attachments, collecting wisdom like fragments of a forgotten truth. But a rare few, maybe you, have reached a place where the curriculum is almost entirely integrated, where life no longer feels like a maze of confusion, but a slow return to something sacred and whole. That place is not common, it's not loud, it's not celebrated by the world, but it exists. And if your soul is nearing that completion, you're probably feeling it more and more, even if you can't quite name it. Something has shifted. Where once there was resistance, there's now surrender. Where there was the need to prove, there's peace in simply being. You no longer feel the fire to conquer or chase. The things that once consumed you, status, conflict, approval, now feel like echoes of someone you used to be, and not because you don't care, but because you see through them. You see the illusion. You recognize the old games of the ego, and instead of fighting them, you quietly bow to them and walk on. That's not apathy. That's evolution. When a soul begins to complete its curriculum, the external world starts to lose its grip. You may still have desires, but they're different now. They're no longer about validation, they're about alignment. They're no longer fueled by scarcity, they flow from presence. It's not that you want less, it's that you want truth. Not in words, but in experience. Not in theory, but in embodiment. And here's where it gets beautiful. Your life starts to simplify, not necessarily on the outside, but internally. The noise in your mind softens, the urgency fades, and in its place, a quiet knowing rises. Like the gentle awareness that you've done this all before, and now, you're just finishing the final brushstrokes. You may notice that you care more about essence than image, that you choose peace over being right, that you're drawn to nature, to silence, to energy over words. You may feel a deeper connection with things that can't be explained, like how a single moment of stillness can move you more than any achievement ever did. These are not signs of burnout or confusion, these are signs of completion, because when the soul nears the end of its earthly journey, it no longer needs constant motion, it seeks stillness, not the stillness of inactivity, but the stillness of presence. It doesn't need the world to understand it. It only seeks to live in harmony with its own truth. It doesn't need others to change. It simply becomes the change, and watches as the world rearranges itself in response. You might be feeling this now, a strange kind of loneliness, not because you're unloved, but because fewer and fewer people seem to meet you where you are. It's not their fault. They're still in earlier phases of the curriculum. They're still learning through friction, but you're starting to learn through flow, through gentleness, through grace. And that can feel isolating, until you realize it's actually sacred. It's a space where the soul prepares for its return, not to a place, but to a frequency. A home that isn't built with walls, but with resonance. Completion doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean you've figured everything out or no longer experience pain. It means you've stopped identifying with pain. It means the story no longer defines you. It means you feel the emotion without getting trapped inside it. You allow the moment to pass through you, and you offer no resistance to the process. You trust life now, even when you don't understand it. That's not detachment, that's mastery. And mastery isn't flashy, it's humble. It lives in the quiet choice to love when it would be easier to close, in the decision to stay present when you could escape, in the commitment to truth when illusions would be more comfortable. If you've been noticing that life seems to be mirroring you more clearly, that what you give is returning faster, that old patterns are dissolving quickly, that manifestations are appearing with less effort, it's because your soul's energy is becoming refined. You're no longer creating from wounds, you're creating from wholeness. And when you do that, the universe responds almost instantly, not as a reward, but as a reflection. You may also feel less reactive, not because you've become passive, but because your identity is no longer wrapped in outcomes. You don't need everything to go your way, you just want what's true. And you've made peace with the fact that truth doesn't always match preference. That's a profound sign of soul maturity. There might also be a deep sense of déjà vu, an intuitive familiarity with places, people, or moments that have no logical explanation. That's not your imagination, it's memory, soul memory. Pieces of your longer journey surfacing as you approach its final chapters. And in those moments, you may feel time differently. Days may feel slower, or faster. You might have moments where you forget who you are in the best way possible, not out of confusion, but because the identity you once wore so tightly has loosened its grip. You're not losing yourself. You're remembering who you were before all the stories began. And maybe that's the greatest sign of all, the remembering. When a soul nears completion, it begins to remember, not in a mental way, but through vibration, through resonance, through feeling. You begin to feel what's real. You don't need to analyze anymore. You know. You know when something is aligned or not. You know when to speak and when to be still. You know when to walk away. You know when to stay and pour love into something broken. This is not arrogance. This is clarity. And clarity is the fruit of many lifetimes spent walking through darkness with only the inner flame to guide you. So if you're feeling different lately, if the world feels softer, if your soul feels louder, if your attachments are loosening, and your love is deepening, then maybe this isn't just another season of life. Maybe this is your closing chapter. Maybe you're not falling apart. Maybe you're finally falling into the self that was always waiting beneath the noise. Not every soul gets to this point. Not every incarnation is built for it. But some are. Some lives are designed not to begin the journey, but to complete it. And if you're still here, still listening, maybe yours is one of them. What if I told you that the greatest prayer you'll ever offer might not be said with your lips, but lived with your life? That sacredness isn't something you visit on Sundays or during silent moments of meditation, but something that rises through your every breath, your every choice, your every interaction. You see, there comes a moment, often quiet and unnoticed, when the soul stops compartmentalizing spirituality. It no longer treats it as something separate from daily life. It doesn't live in a temple or on a cushion or in a book. It starts to radiate through everything, and when that happens, you know you've entered a different kind of relationship with existence. This is the first sign that your life has become the prayer. It's not about rituals or frequency. It's not about how many mantras you recite or how many candles you light. Those things can be beautiful, yes, but what this speaks to is deeper. It's about how you show up when no one's watching, It's about what your energy whispers to the world without ever saying a word. It's about the invisible offering you make through the way you love, forgive, serve, and simply exist. You may notice that you can no longer separate your spiritual values from your human life. You feel it when you speak truth, even when it's uncomfortable. You feel it when you treat the stranger with the same reverence as your teacher. You feel it when you wash the dishes, and something in you is aware, completely aware, that even this moment is holy. That's the harmony of spirit and matter. That's when your soul is no longer trying to escape the world but is instead infusing the world. Every movement becomes an extension of your inner light. Every gesture, a reflection of alignment. Every step you take, a conscious imprint on the earth that says, I am awake, I am here, I am choosing to live as love. It's a strange transition when it happens, because you don't always realize it at first. You're just doing what feels natural. You're making aligned choices. You're speaking from the heart. You're honoring your body. You're spending time in nature. You're creating without force. And then one day, it hits you. This is your prayer now. Not a separate act, but a state of being. You begin to notice how your relationships shift. You no longer entertain anything that doesn't honor your spirit. Not out of arrogance or judgment, but because your inner frequency has become too refined to tolerate distortion. You begin to surround yourself with energy that feels like home. You no longer chase, fix, or prove. You simply align. And that quiet alignment speaks louder than any sermon ever could. Even your work becomes sacred, not because of what it looks like from the outside, but because of how it's offered. Whether you're making art, holding space, writing emails, growing food, or raising children, it becomes an offering, a living transmission of your essence, a vessel through which spirit moves into form. And when spirit begins to move through form, that's when the integration happens. That's when the inner and the outer become one. That's when you're no longer trying to become spiritual. You've remembered that you always were. This doesn't mean life becomes perfect. It means you stop resisting what it gives you. You meet the hard days with gentleness. You meet the beautiful days with gratitude. You stop asking, why me? And start asking, how can I move through this with grace? Even pain becomes part of the prayer, not because you enjoy it, but because you trust that it has something to reveal, something to shape, something to liberate. The ego begins to dissolve not through force, but through reverence. You realize you don't need to control everything anymore. You don't need to fix every perception. You don't need everyone to agree with you. You just need to stay in truth, and truth is simple. Truth is silent. Truth doesn't beg to be seen. It radiates. This is what it means when your life becomes the prayer. You move through the world like a silent hymn, not loud, not grandiose, but clear, steady, consistent. You become the one others feel peace around without knowing why. You become the anchor when storms rise. You become the reminder, not in words, but in presence, that divinity isn't somewhere else. It's right here, in the middle of traffic, in the middle of heartbreak, in the middle of laughter, in the middle of you. You find yourself making choices that reflect your soul rather than your fears. You no longer betray yourself to belong. You no longer shrink to be accepted. You speak with kindness, but without distortion. You walk away when something violates your inner integrity, not to punish, but to protect the sacred space you now carry within. And that sacred space, it's growing. It expands every time you honor your boundaries, every time you say no to what drains you, every time you say yes to what nourishes you, every time you listen to the quiet voice inside that says, this is who you really are. It's not about perfection, it's about alignment. Even in your mistakes, you bring awareness. Even in your mess, there is honesty. Even when you fall, you rise with more compassion, not just for yourself, but for everyone who's ever fallen too. And perhaps that's the most profound part of all. When your life becomes the prayer, you stop separating yourself from others. You stop judging where someone is in their path. You no longer need them to awaken for you to feel safe. You simply love them where they are, while staying rooted in where you are. That's sovereignty, that's compassion, that's sacred maturity. It may not be obvious to others. You may never get recognition for it. In fact, the more integrated your soul becomes, the less visible your spirituality may appear on the outside. Because it's not a performance anymore, it's a presence. So look at your life, not through the lens of achievement, but through the lens of alignment. Are your relationships built on truth? Do your words match your heart? Does your work honor your essence? Does your inner voice lead more than the external noise? If the answer is yes, even some of the time, then you are already walking the path of sacred integration. You are already embodying the first sign that this life might be your last in this realm, not because you've escaped anything, but because you've become everything you were meant to become. You are no longer reaching up for something divine. You are becoming the vessel through which the divine touches everything. Your life is the altar now. What if I told you that the most powerful love you will ever offer isn't the kind that clings, convinces, or tries to save, but the kind that sees someone clearly, holds them fully, and still lets them be exactly who they are? What if love, in its highest form, isn't about changing someone or shaping them into a version that fits your idea of healing, but about holding space so sacredly that they are free to meet themselves? This is the second sign that your soul may be nearing completion. You love without needing to fix. It might not sound dramatic. It might not come with thunder and lightning. But this is one of the most profound spiritual maturities a soul can reach. Because for most of your journey, across lifetimes, you've learned how to feel love, how to offer it, how to protect it. But there comes a moment when the love you carry becomes so unconditional, so refined, that it doesn't demand transformation. It simply allows. That kind of love doesn't have strings attached. It doesn't say, "I'll love you when you heal," or "I'll love you if you grow." It says, "I love you right now, as you are, whether you choose to rise or choose to stay." That's not apathy, that's divinity. It takes lifetimes to get here, because in the earlier phases of the soul's journey, love is still entangled with fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of not being seen, fear of losing control. We try to fix others because we think their healing is our responsibility. Or we try to change people because we think their transformation will make us feel safer. But eventually, the soul sees the pattern and lets go. You begin to understand that helping doesn't always mean intervening. That service doesn't always mean solving. That compassion isn't about absorbing someone's pain or dragging them out of it. It's about presence. It's about being the steady light beside them while they find their own path out of the dark. And that's where the paradox arises. You become more loving, but less entangled, more giving, but less attached, more present, but less controlling. You stop trying to rescue people from their own lessons because you now understand the curriculum of the soul is sacred. Interfering can rob someone of the exact experience they need to evolve. This doesn't mean you abandon others. It doesn't mean you become cold. In fact, you become warmer. Your love is felt even more deeply, precisely because it's not trying to manipulate or direct. It's clean, it's open, it's safe. You listen without trying to fix. You hold space without imposing. You offer your truth without needing to be right. And perhaps most importantly, you no longer make someone else's healing your mission. You finally realize that love, in its purest form, is about witnessing, not molding. There's a softness that grows in your presence. People feel it. They may not know why, but they feel safe around you. Not because you're giving them solutions, but because you're not adding pressure. You're not projecting judgment. You're not requiring them to meet you at your level. You're just being with them. And in that beingness, something inside them begins to shift. Not because you forced it, but because you didn't. You start to sense this in the little things. You no longer feel the urge to jump in when someone is venting. You stop offering advice unless it's asked for. You no longer chase the ones who pull away, trying to show them their worth. You let people walk their paths, even if those paths don't include you, because you've learned to trust the intelligence of the soul, their soul, your soul, all of it. This is what it means to hold divine detachment. It's not cold, it's not distant, it's deeply compassionate and deeply trusting. It says, "I believe in your process." It says, "I honor your timeline." It says, "I love you enough to not interfere." You begin to feel love, not as an emotion that comes and goes, but as a field you exist in. You become it. And when you are love, you no longer need to seek it. You no longer fear its loss. You no longer need it to behave a certain way to feel safe. That's the freedom of a soul that's been through enough lifetimes to know, love isn't something you do, it's what you are when all fear is gone. This kind of love changes everything. It changes how you parent. You stop projecting your own unhealed stories onto your children. You guide, yes, but you don't shape them into extensions of your ego. You listen to their souls. You trust their wisdom. You give them space to unfold. You don't panic when they struggle. You hold space. It changes how you relate to your partner. You stop needing them to complete you. You stop trying to make them into your source of peace. You stop demanding they evolve at your pace. You love them where they are. And that love, ironically, often becomes the very catalyst that helps them rise. It changes your friendships. You no longer bond through pain. You no longer need to fix people's drama. You stop trying to be the emotional janitor of every relationship. You stop being the one who gives and gives, while expecting someone to change in return. You give freely now, but only when the giving is clean. You rest when it's not. And perhaps most subtly of all, it changes how you love yourself. You stop trying to fix the parts of you that are still healing. You stop waging war against your insecurities. You stop judging your own process. You hold space for your own becoming. You treat your evolution with the same softness you've started offering to others. That's the turning point. Because here's the secret. The way you love others is a reflection of how you've learned to love yourself. And when you stop trying to fix the world, it's often because you've stopped trying to fix your own soul and started honoring it. This is the quiet power of a soul nearing completion. You no longer get pulled into every crisis. You no longer lose your center when someone else is in pain. You remain open, but grounded, present, but not enmeshed, loving, but free. And in that freedom, something remarkable happens. The people around you feel safer to be themselves. They sense that you're not waiting for them to transform, and somehow, paradoxically, that's when they start to. Not because they were told to, but because they were loved into it. That is the paradox of divine detachment. The less you try to control someone's growth, the more space you give them to actually grow. The less you try to be their savior, the more they discover their own strength. Your presence becomes the mirror. Your non-reactivity becomes the teacher. Your love becomes the permission slip for them to come home to themselves. This is the second sign. And if you recognize it in your life, not just occasionally, but consistently, then something profound is happening. Your soul is reaching a level of maturity that few ever reach. You've moved beyond conditional love. You've moved beyond fixing. You've stepped into the rarest form of service, sacred witnessing. You're no longer here to change everyone. You're here to love them, exactly as they are. What if I told you that the moment you stop seeing others as separate from you is the moment your soul truly begins to awaken, that what you've called the world isn't outside you, but an extension of your own divine unfolding? What if the people you struggle with, the ones who challenge you the most, are not obstacles to your peace, but mirrors placed in your path to help you remember who you really are? This is the third sign, and it doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't crash through the doors of your life with fanfare. It emerges quietly, in the way you start softening toward people you once judged, in the way you begin to see yourself in the eyes of strangers, in the way your heart opens, without effort, to the very ones your ego spent years trying to resist. This is the disappearance of other. It's subtle at first. You notice it in conversations that would have triggered you a few years ago. You listen now instead of defend. You ask questions instead of jumping to conclusions. You feel curiosity where there once was resentment, and slowly, the walls inside you begin to crumble. The line between you and them fades. You no longer feel the need to categorize people into right or wrong, awake or asleep, good or bad. Those were the tools of your earlier journey, necessary for navigating the world when your soul was still learning through contrast. But now, you don't need those categories anymore. You've moved beyond them. You've seen too much. You've felt too deeply. You understand that every person is walking through their own perfectly designed curriculum, just like you once did, and still are. So you stop making enemies out of the ones who don't understand you. You stop trying to convert those who live differently. You no longer need everyone to see what you see, or believe what you believe. You've realized that truth doesn't need to be defended. It needs to be embodied. And when you embody it, others feel it. They may not always recognize it consciously, but something inside them remembers. You begin to experience oneness not as a concept, but as a felt reality. You feel it when you walk past someone, and your heart catches without reason. You feel it when you read about someone suffering halfway across the world, and tears rise in your chest as if it were happening to your own family. You feel it when someone lashes out in pain, and instead of reacting, you feel a wave of compassion, because you see the wounded child underneath. You feel it when someone succeeds, and instead of jealousy, you feel joy, because their joy is also yours. This is the awakening of collective consciousness. And when it happens, you don't become passive. You become present, deeply present. You care more, not less. But your caring doesn't carry the weight of judgment anymore. It carries the weightlessness of love. You can see the dysfunction in the world, and still remain anchored in peace. You can acknowledge injustice without hardening your heart. You can hold space for opposing realities without losing your center. This shift is not small, it's monumental, because for most of humanity's timeline, survival required separation. It required identifying enemies, protecting boundaries, drawing lines in the sand. But now, your soul knows that true safety doesn't come from division. It comes from remembrance. From recognizing the thread that connects all living things. From knowing that beneath the personality, beneath the trauma, beneath the conditioning, every single soul you meet is made of the same source as you, even the ones who forget, even the ones who hurt, even the ones who try to push you away. This doesn't mean you tolerate abuse. It doesn't mean you deny your boundaries, but it does mean you can hold someone in your heart while also holding them at a distance. It means you can say no without closing your heart. It means you no longer need hatred to protect your energy. Love does that now. Clear, firm, boundaried love. You begin to experience connection in everything. You see the universe speaking through people who don't even realize they're vessels. You hear the divine whisper in overheard conversations. You look into the eyes of the person bagging your groceries or delivering your mail, and something in you bows. Not because of their role, but because of their essence. Because you see them, not the identity, not the story, but the light. And when you see that light everywhere, something inside you begins to dissolve. The parts of you that once needed to be superior, gone. The parts that found identity in being more awakened, more spiritual, more conscious, fading. You don't need those labels anymore. You've remembered that love doesn't need hierarchy. It just island. And now, so are you. You start to forgive more easily. Not because you're weak, but because you no longer want to carry the weight. You no longer want to carry the illusion of separation. You don't want to walk around with walls in your heart. You know now that forgiveness is not about excusing behavior. It's about reclaiming your freedom from the illusion that anyone could truly harm your soul. And you feel the ache of the world more deeply. But it doesn't paralyze you. It activates you. It inspires you to speak with more clarity, to love more courageously, to show up more fully. You no longer wait for the world to change. You become the frequency that births change simply by existing. When you begin to experience this level of unity, your purpose becomes less about individual achievement and more about collective healing. You care less about being seen and more about seeing others. You care less about being heard and more about listening deeply. You begin to serve without needing credit. You give without measuring. You love without protecting. And people feel it. They may not know what to call it. But in your presence, they feel safe. They feel real. They feel home. Not because you've said anything profound, but because your energy has become an open field, free of judgment, free of division, free of fear. This is what happens when the other disappears. You no longer need the world to mirror your beliefs to feel secure. You don't need validation to feel valuable. You don't need to be agreed with to stand in peace. You can walk into a room of wildly different energies and remain soft, open, and whole. Not because you're superior, but because you've remembered who you really are. A soul, a spark, a strand of the divine wrapped in temporary form. And so is everyone else. This knowing changes everything. It simplifies your path. It quiets your mind. It opens your heart. And it humbles you, deeply, because you begin to see that you're not here to win. You're here to weave, to weave connection, to weave compassion, to weave light into places that have forgotten it. If you've begun to feel this shift, if the lines are blurring, if the enemies are dissolving, if the old need to judge is falling away, then something sacred is happening inside you. You're not just waking up, you're waking up as one. What if I told you that the struggles you've carried for lifetimes, the repetitive patterns, the painful loops, the magnetic pull toward the same lessons again and again, were never punishments, but initiations? And what if I told you that right now, in this very life, those loops may be closing for good? That what you've been calling karma may actually be reaching its final chapter, not because you've run out of chances, but because you've outgrown the need? There comes a moment in the soul's journey when karma doesn't disappear, it dissolves, and that difference matters, because karma, at its root, isn't about justice or retribution, it's about resonance. It's about reflection. It's the echo of your own energy bouncing back toward you, not as a punishment, but as a mirror, a sacred invitation to see clearly, to act differently, to respond from a higher place than you once could. And for most of your journey, that echo was necessary. You needed the cause and effect, you needed the feedback loop, you needed to see what you couldn't yet feel, so you created lives full of contrast. You called in relationships that challenged you, losses that awakened you, patterns that forced you to choose again and again between fear and love, reaction and presence, judgment and compassion. Not because you were broken, but because you were becoming whole. But something shifts when the soul begins to remember. It's not about perfection, it's about response. When you stop reacting from old wounds and start responding from your true essence, you interrupt the karmic pattern. You pause the cycle long enough for consciousness to pour in, and in that moment, just one conscious moment, you begin to rewrite the future. This is the fourth sign. Karma begins to dissolve. You notice it in the subtle ways first. The same people who used to trigger you now feel neutral. You don't take the bait anymore. You don't get pulled into the spiral. You don't feel the need to explain yourself or win the argument. Something in you just knows it's not worth the energy. And not because you're avoiding, but because you're aware. You begin to see the situation for what it is, a test you've already passed. A wound you've already tended to. A cycle you no longer need to spin inside. And because you choose not to engage with it the way you used to, it loses its power over you. You might still feel the emotional residue at times. You might still feel the old story try to hook you, but it doesn't land the same way. It doesn't stick. You breathe, you center, you choose again, and each time you do, you close a loop. This is what it means when the karmic ledger starts to clear. Not that you suddenly live a life free of all challenges, but that your relationship to challenge has transformed. You no longer meet difficulty with resistance. You meet it with curiosity, you meet it with love, you meet it with wisdom that was born not from theory, but from direct, sacred experience. And in doing so, you send a new signal to the universe, a signal that says, this soul no longer needs repetition to evolve, this soul has learned, this soul has integrated. This soul is choosing differently now, not because it has to, but because it wants to. That's the key. When love becomes the natural response, not the forced one, karma begins to fade. Because karma was never about punishment, it was about learning. And once the learning is embodied, the cycle completes itself. You begin to experience more spaciousness, you feel more grace, more flow, life feels less heavy, not because it's gotten easier, but because you've stopped carrying the unnecessary weight. You're no longer dragging the past into every moment. You're no longer projecting fear into every choice. You're present, clean, available, aligned. You may even notice that your manifestations begin to accelerate, not in a materialistic sense, but in a vibrational one. What you radiate returns quickly. You think of something, and it appears. You speak your truth, and the universe responds. Why? Because the karmic delay is gone, the fog is lifted, your field is clear, and in that clarity, there is power. Not the kind that controls, the kind that co-creates. You realize that you are no longer at the mercy of unconscious momentum. You are now choosing your path from the seat of awareness. And from that seat, life begins to meet you with new reflections. Higher reflections. Ones that mirror not your wounds, but your wisdom. But here's what no one tells you. Sometimes, when karma is about to dissolve, the pattern will show up one last time. It's not a punishment, it's a confirmation, a final exam. A question whispered by the universe. Have you truly changed? Will you respond differently this time? And you'll know it when it happens. You'll feel the echo of the old energy, you'll sense the familiar trap, but you'll pause, you'll breathe, and instead of falling back into the pattern, you'll rise. You'll choose kindness over retaliation. You'll choose silence over defensiveness. You'll choose boundaries over blame. You'll choose truth over comfort. And in that moment, the wheel slows. The karma clears. The loop ends. Not with a bang, but with a soft, sacred exhale. This is not about never feeling triggered again. It's about becoming the one who doesn't feed the trigger. It's about becoming the one who can observe, soften, respond, and alchemize the energy into something healing, something real, something new. That is spiritual mastery. And it doesn't announce itself. It just lives quietly in your choices, in the way you carry yourself, in the way you forgive, in the way you love without expectation, in the way you stop searching for external validation because the peace inside you is already whole. So ask yourself, are the patterns still controlling you, or are you now meeting them from a different frequency? Are you still needing life to look a certain way to feel okay? Or are you allowing the moment to teach you what it came to teach? Are you still reacting from fear, or are you responding from love? If you're responding differently, even a little, even inconsistently, you're already moving into liberation. You're already shifting out of cause and effect, and into conscious creation. You're already dissolving the karma, not by fighting it, but by no longer matching its vibration. And that's how the karmic wheel ends. Not by force, not by avoidance, but by becoming the kind of soul who no longer needs it, not because you've given up, but because you've finally woken up. What if I told you that the deepest form of power is not found in force or ambition, but in surrender? That your highest path isn't something you build from the outside in, but something you remember from the inside out? And what if I told you that the more you align with divine will, the less life feels like striving, and the more it begins to feel like flowing, in perfect harmony with something ancient, vast, and infinitely wise? This is the fifth and final sign, and it doesn't look like most people expect. It's not grand, it's not loud, it doesn't come with fireworks or some dramatic spiritual event. It happens quietly, gently, deeply. One day, without realizing it, you stop pushing. You stop chasing. You stop needing to bend reality to your preferences. And instead, you begin to listen. Not just to your thoughts, but to something deeper. A whisper beneath the noise. A current beneath the chaos. A knowing that guides not from the mind, but from the soul. At this stage of your journey, your personal will, the part of you that once needed to control, direct, and achieve, begins to soften. It's not destroyed, it's not abandoned, it's transformed. Transmuted into something more refined, more surrendered, more holy. You realize that personal will was never the problem. It was simply immature. It believed it had to do everything alone. It believed that safety came from control, that love had to be earned, that success was a race, that life needed to look a certain way for you to feel okay. But now you've seen behind the curtain. You've felt the emptiness of striving. You've tasted the stillness that comes when you let go, and you're beginning to understand that there's a greater will at play, one that's not separate from you, but flowing through you. This is divine will. And when your soul is ready for liberation, it becomes your compass. You stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, "What is true for me right now?" You stop demanding that the path be clear before you take the first step. You start walking in faith, not blind faith, but embodied trust. A trust born from 1,000 moments, where the unseen carried you when you didn't know how to carry yourself. You begin to notice that the more you release your grip, the more life meets you with synchronicity. The right people appear, the right opportunities open. The timing becomes perfect, even when it's not what you planned. You no longer hustle to manifest, you align to receive. You don't force your way through doors anymore. You wait, you listen. You allow yourself to be called. And when you are called, you move. not with hesitation, but with devotion, not from fear, but from clarity. Not to prove anything, but to express what's already alive within you. This is the shift from control to co-creation. It's not that you become passive, you're deeply engaged with life, but your engagement is rooted in presence, not pressure, in listening, not striving. You don't rush decisions. You wait until they're ripened by the moment. You don't need to have all the answers. You trust that the next step will appear when your energy is ready for it. This level of surrender doesn't mean you lose your identity. It means your identity expands. You're no longer just a person trying to make life work. You're an extension of something sacred, something vast, something that is orchestrating everything with divine intelligence. And your role is to listen. You may notice this in how you make choices. What used to be driven by ego, status, validation, fear of missing out, is now guided by resonance. You make decisions not because they're logical, but because they feel right. And even when they don't make sense to others, you trust them. Because your compass isn't external anymore. It's internal. It's intuitive. It's sacred. You begin to speak differently. Your words are fewer, but they carry more weight. You don't need to convince. You don't need to argue. You don't need to be understood. You only need to be aligned. You begin to see that peace isn't a goal. It's a byproduct of being in sync with divine will. And when you're in sync, even the hard moments carry meaning. Even the pain has purpose. You don't resist life's seasons. You honor them. You know that winter isn't a failure of spring. It's a necessary pause, a sacred shedding, a preparation for deeper blossoming. You begin to see every challenge as an invitation, every delay as divine timing, every loss as a redirection, every silence as a space for integration, and in that space, your soul rests. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is held. You are no longer carrying life, you are being carried by it. You've learned how to release without collapse, how to surrender without shrinking, how to open your hands, not in defeat, but in trust. This is the sign of readiness. When divine will becomes your compass, your soul is no longer bound by karma, identity, or fear. You are no longer living from reaction, you are living from resonance. You are no longer trying to escape the world, you are anchoring heaven into it. And the world begins to feel different, not because it's changed, but because you have. You walk through life with reverence. You move slower, but with more clarity. You speak softer, but with more truth. You act less often, but with more impact. You become a vessel for something greater, not because you forced it, but because you finally opened. And what flows through you now is holy. Not because it wears a robe or speaks in verses, but because it is free of distortion, free of ego, free of resistance. It is pure. It is precise. It is divine will, expressing itself through the living instrument of your life. If you've begun to feel this shift, if you're no longer chasing, no longer fighting, no longer trying to bend life to your will, then you've reached something rare, something sacred. You've reached the end of striving and the beginning of service, not the kind of service that drains you, but the kind that fills you, the kind that reminds you who you truly are. Because you're not just a soul learning how to surrender, you are surrender itself, remembering its form. And this is how liberation begins. What if I told you that the signs you've been searching for aren't out there? They're not in the stars, or in the pages of sacred texts, or in the voices of others. They're inside you, quiet, subtle, persistent, and the more you learn to listen, the more they begin to reveal themselves. Not as revelations from some distant realm, but as reminders of a truth your soul already knows. You've walked through lifetimes to get here. You've been the seeker, the skeptic, the teacher, the wounded, the healer, and now, here you are, on the edge of something holy. Not because you've reached the end, but because you're finally seeing that the end was never somewhere far away. It was always inside of you. So now, the mirror is turned toward you, not to judge, not to critique, but to reflect, to offer you the chance to see what's already awakening in your life. The first sign asked, has your life become the prayer? Not the prayer you speak with words, but the one you live with your presence. Have you noticed how your choices are shifting? How your relationships are becoming more aligned? How the small moments, like making tea, or listening fully, or resting in silence, are starting to feel sacred. That's not random. That's the beginning of inner devotion, when the divine is no longer something you visit, but something you carry. Do you recognize that in yourself? And what about the second sign? Are you loving without needing to fix? Are you beginning to see others with softer eyes, to hold space rather than give advice, to trust their journey without needing to shape it? That detachment isn't coldness, it's wisdom. It's a sign that your heart is maturing into something that no longer operates on conditions. Have you noticed how your love has changed, not become smaller, but freer? That's a sign. That's a signal. That's your soul, remembering its power. The third sign asked if the illusion of separation is dissolving. Look around. Have you started seeing less other and more we? Do you feel a tenderness towards strangers you used to ignore? A softening toward people you once judged? That's not weakness, that's awakening. When your lens shifts from comparison to connection, you're not losing your edge, you're gaining your eyes. The ones that see clearly, the ones that see oneness, the ones that no longer need an enemy in order to feel strong. Is that happening in you? And then there's the fourth sign. Karma. Are you noticing that it's loosening its grip? The patterns that once haunted you, are they starting to fade? Or maybe they still arise, but now you meet them with awareness, with choice, with love. That shift, from reaction to response, is not small, it's everything. That's the moment when the soul says, I've learned, I no longer need to repeat, I choose peace. Is that the voice rising in you now? And finally, the fifth sign. Divine will becoming your compass. Are you starting to feel the surrender that doesn't mean giving up, but giving into? Are you feeling the quiet pull to trust rather than force, to listen rather than chase? That's not apathy. That's divine alignment. That's you stepping out of the ego's illusion of control and into the river of grace that's always been guiding you. Is your will dissolving into something deeper, steadier, more true? Look at these signs again, not as checkpoints, not as goals, but as mirrors, because the truth is, if you've been drawn to this path, if something in you resonates with what you've heard, it's because these signs are not just possibilities, they're remembrances. You're not being asked to become someone new. You're being invited to remember who you already are, and that remembering won't always feel like light and bliss. Sometimes it feels like loss, like confusion, like disorientation, because as the old self dissolves, there's a gap, a sacred in-between. A space where the familiar no longer fits, and the new has not fully arrived. If you're in that space now, breathe. You're not lost, you're becoming. This path isn't linear. Some days, you'll feel like you've embodied every sign. Other days, you'll feel like you've forgotten everything. That's okay. Awakening doesn't mean constant clarity. It means returning, again and again, to what's real, to what's rooted, to what's eternal inside you. So take a breath, and look gently into your life. Have you become more honest with yourself? Have you chosen peace when you could have chosen chaos? Have you walked away from what no longer honors your spirit? Have you stayed soft in a world that teaches hardness? Have you forgiven someone who didn't ask for it? Have you listened to the whisper that says, there is more, and you are ready? If even one of these is true for you, then you are walking the path. You are embodying the signs. You are nearing something sacred, not because of how much you've achieved, but because of how deeply you've awakened. The sacred mirror doesn't ask for perfection, it asks for presence. It doesn't measure your enlightenment, it reflects your essence. And that essence is not behind some veil, it's not waiting for you to be worthy. It's here, now, in your breath, in your heartbeat. In the way you're reading these words and feeling something stir inside you, a memory, a knowing, a call. So the real question isn't whether these signs are happening in your life. The question is, are you ready to trust that they are? Are you willing to stop minimizing your growth? Are you willing to stop pretending you're behind? Are you willing to stop waiting for someone else to confirm what your soul already knows? This could be the life where everything shifts. Not because the world changes, but because you do. Because you stop fighting what wants to emerge. Because you say yes to the quiet truth that keeps knocking. Because you recognize yourself, not as a seeker, but as a remembering soul, standing in front of the sacred mirror, finally seeing what was there all along. What if I told you that some of your hardest moments, those long nights you thought would break you, the heartbreaks that gutted you, the illnesses that stopped you cold, weren't just accidents of fate, but carefully chosen lessons your soul mapped out long before you arrived here. And what if I told you that you may have already completed more of that soul curriculum than you think? There's a reason certain experiences keep replaying until, one day, they simply don't. There's a reason the pain that used to knock you over now moves through you like wind. You may have thought you were simply getting stronger, but what if that strength is the sign that the test is already over? What if the storm quieted, not because the world became easier, but because you became wiser? There is a hidden curriculum to every soul's journey. It's not written in books or measured by material success. It's not about perfection or performance. It's coded into your very being, activated through specific events, people, choices, and inner thresholds. And once that lesson is integrated, fully, deeply, energetically, the cycle closes, the requirement dissolves. The graduation happens not with a ceremony, but with an exhale you didn't even know you were holding. You may not have recognized it at the time, most people don't, because spiritual lessons rarely arrive with labels. They come dressed as everyday life. They arrive in breakups, in rejections, in sleepless nights, and quiet moments of despair. They show up when the job falls through, when the body breaks down, when the relationship ends, when everything you counted on collapses beneath you. But when the dust settles, something unexpected begins to rise, a deeper you, a version of yourself no longer chained to fear, no longer reliant on approval, no longer operating from the same reactive identity. And that is the sign. The you who emerges after the breakdown isn't the same one who entered it. You may have already completed lessons that once seemed impossible to survive. Think about it. The loss that once defined your life story, does it still hold the same power? Or has it transformed into something softer, something sacred, something that opened you in a way comfort never could? That's not forgetting, that's integration, that's soul-level mastery. You may have spent years in survival mode, thinking the goal was simply to make it through, but maybe, just maybe, your soul was using that exact season to strengthen you into someone who no longer needs to seek external safety, someone who knows that the real sanctuary is within. Look at your past not through the lens of pain, but through the lens of completion. That betrayal, did it teach you boundaries? That illness, did it make you listen to your body in ways you never had before? That season of loneliness, did it help you connect to your intuition more clearly? That sacrifice you made, did it anchor you in compassion, humility, or grace? Because here's what no one tells you. Just because something was hard doesn't mean it wasn't holy. Just because it didn't end the way you wanted doesn't mean it didn't end the way your soul needed. Your higher self wasn't trying to punish you. It was trying to wake you up. And maybe it already did. Maybe you're not in the middle of the lesson anymore. Maybe you're already standing on the other side, carrying the wisdom, the scars, the softness, and the strength. But because no one gave you a diploma, because there was no big shift in the outer world, you didn't realize you already passed the test. So many souls carry guilt, shame, or confusion about their pasts, without realizing they've already completed the karmic contract. They stay small out of habit. They stay in survival mode because it's familiar, but if you were to pause and really feel into your being, you might discover that the struggle is no longer required, that the healing has already occurred, that the growth is already complete. You may still have challenges. That's natural. But if those challenges feel different now, less personal, less triggering, more navigable, that's a sign. A sign that the energy behind the old patterns has lifted. That you no longer need the lesson to be repeated because the knowing has landed inside you. You don't need to prove your growth by suffering longer. You don't need to punish yourself because you used to make choices from fear. What matters now is the awareness you carry. That is the real evidence of evolution. That is the true graduation. Not perfection, but presence. Not control, but clarity. Look at the decisions you make now. Are they rooted in alignment rather than anxiety? Do you say yes more slowly? Do you say no more confidently? Do you feel your energy pulling you away from what no longer serves you without guilt, without over-explaining? These are not small things. These are soul-level shifts. You've walked through fire and emerged with your essence intact. You've been cracked open, and instead of breaking, you expanded. You've been humbled, and instead of shrinking, you became real. You've been tested, and instead of collapsing, you rose. That's what completion looks like. Not always neat, not always beautiful, but unmistakably real. Sometimes the lesson isn't that you need to do more, it's that you need to see yourself more clearly, to recognize who you've become, to honor the resilience, the softness, the wisdom that has taken root inside you. You're no longer the same. And if you can recognize that, then you can stop carrying the old curriculum like a backpack full of outdated assignments. It's time to release the illusion that you're still behind. It's time to release the belief that you need to earn your next level. It's time to release the story that says you're still broken, still learning, still lost. What if you're not? What if you've already done what you came here to do, and now you're being invited to live from that completion, to trust that the invisible ceremonies have already taken place, that the soul contracts have been fulfilled, that the wisdom you carry now isn't hypothetical. It's hard-won. It's encoded into your choices, your presence, your peace. You don't need a sign from the sky. You need a moment of honesty. Look into your life. Look into your patterns. Look into your energy. Do you still feel bound by what once controlled you? Do you still feel pulled to what once kept you small? Do you still crave the things you once chased blindly? Or has something shifted, even subtly? If so, then you've graduated. Quietly, powerfully, completely. You've already completed parts of your sacred curriculum, and now, a new chapter begins. What if I told you that reincarnation isn't a punishment or a sentence? It's a choice. What if returning to Earth isn't something that just happens to you, but something you agree to at a level so deep, so sacred, your conscious mind could barely comprehend it? And what if the life you're living right now, the struggles you've faced, the love you've shared, the pain you've endured, was part of that soul agreement? A decision made long before your birth, not because you had to, but because your soul chose to. There is a common belief that reincarnation is automatic, that after we die, we're sent back to Earth again and again in an endless loop until we finally get it right. But the truth is far more nuanced. Reincarnation is not one size fits all. Souls don't just tumble back into existence blindly. The soul is sovereign, and at the heart of every incarnation is a choice. Some souls return because they feel incomplete. There are attachments left unresolved, desires still burning, karmic threads still tangled. They come back because something within them is still reaching, still learning, still needing to experience a particular kind of healing or wholeness. These are the souls still wrapped in the echo of Earth's gravity, not just physical gravity, but emotional, energetic, karmic gravity. They haven't yet loosened their grip on the illusions that live here, on identity, on status, on control, on needing to be understood or seen or validated. And so, Earth calls them back, not as punishment, but as an open classroom, offering them one more sacred opportunity to remember who they truly are. But other souls return for a different reason. Not because they must, but because they choose to. These are the souls who've already completed their personal curriculum. They've already dissolved their karma, surrendered their attachments, remembered their divine origin. But they return anyway, not for themselves, but for the collective. They return as volunteers, as anchors, as beacons of a frequency that humanity is beginning to remember. They come back, not to escape the Earth cycle, but to bless it, not to gain something, but to give. And then, there are the souls who don't return at all. Not because they've failed, but because they've finished. They have integrated the totality of their Earth experiences across lifetimes. They've walked through love, loss, betrayal, beauty, power, humility, sacrifice, devotion. They've passed through the fires of duality and emerged not as perfect beings, but as whole ones. They no longer need contrast to grow, no longer need separation to remember unity, no longer need form to know the formless. When that level of integration happens, reincarnation becomes optional. Earth is no longer a requirement, it becomes one choice among many. And for some souls, the journey continues beyond this planet, into dimensions of consciousness where the learning is more subtle, more fluid, more radiant. For others, the soul simply rests, returning to the source in full remembrance, like a drop returning to the ocean, carrying with it all the stories, all the wisdom, all the love gathered through lifetimes of becoming. So the question becomes, where are you in that spectrum? Could it be that this life, the one you're living right now, isn't just another round, but a threshold, a completion point? A moment of reckoning where you get to ask, do I still need to come back, or am I ready to choose? That question isn't answered with the mind. It's felt in the heart. It's whispered in the quiet moments when your soul feels tired, not from despair, but from completion, when you no longer crave drama, when you no longer seek external validation, when you no longer need the earth to fulfill something inside you, because you've already remembered your wholeness. But here's the paradox. The souls who reach that level of clarity often do choose to return, not for themselves, but for others. They choose to reincarnate one more time, or 10 more times, not to complete anything, but to hold space for humanity's awakening. They come back as midwives of light, gently helping others through the birth canal of remembering, and they do it with humility. They don't need recognition, they don't need to be followed, they don't need titles. They simply show up, with presence, with peace, with love. So how do you know where you are in all of this? You start by noticing your relationship to Earth itself. Does the world still feel like a battleground? Or does it feel like a garden? Do you still carry resentment for being here? Or have you started to see the sacredness in it all, even the pain? Are you still trying to escape, or are you finally starting to embody? You also notice your relationship to your own soul. Do you still feel the pull of old patterns, or are they softening? Do you still feel driven by fear and survival, or is something deeper guiding you now? Are you still looking for the answer, or are you becoming the space where answers arise naturally, without force? And perhaps most importantly, you notice your relationship to others. Are you still trying to fix them, convert them, prove something to them? Or are you beginning to love them exactly as they are, without needing to interfere with their path? Are you beginning to trust the divine unfolding, not just in your life, but in theirs? These are not yes or no questions. They are mirrors. They are invitations to explore your inner terrain with gentleness, with honesty, with reverence. Because if you are nearing the point of soul choice, you will feel it. You'll feel the loosening. You'll feel the quiet readiness. You'll feel the shift from doing to being. You'll feel the love that no longer depends on form. And you'll realize that whether you return or not, it will not be from lack. It will be from liberation. The idea that reincarnation is endless is rooted in fear. But the truth is, you are not trapped in a cycle. You are part of an unfolding masterpiece. You are not climbing a ladder to worthiness. You are swimming in an ocean of remembrance. And when you are ready, truly ready, you will know that the next chapter of your soul's journey is not bound by fate. It is born from freedom. So if you've felt lately that something is ending, if you've sensed a completion rising within you, if your heart is no longer fighting but opening, if your presence feels deeper than ever before, then maybe, just maybe, you're not preparing for another round, you're preparing for a choice. What if I told you that the realization that this might be your last life doesn't mean retreating from the world, but becoming more present in it than you've ever been? What if, instead of floating away into some mystical escape, your soul's final earth chapter is actually a call to embody the divine more fully, more consciously, more courageously than ever before? For so long, the spiritual path has been confused with transcendence, with getting out, with rising above. But the deeper truth is this: completion doesn't pull you away from life, it draws you into it, with cleaner hands, a clearer heart, and a soul that knows how to touch the world without clinging to it. When you begin to feel the whispers of finality in your soul, when you sense that you may not need to come back again, you aren't being asked to disappear, you're being asked to show up in the most radiant, humble, and grounded way possible. There is a sacred moment in the soul's journey when it realizes, I am not here to escape the world, I am here to bless it. That realization marks the turning point. The shift from personal seeking to collective service. Not service rooted in obligation or martyrdom, but service that flows naturally from a heart that no longer feels separate. A heart that has made peace with its own shadows, and can now hold space for others, without judgment, without need, without agenda. If this is your last life, or one of your final ones, It's not because you've mastered everything. It's because you've remembered enough to live from love instead of fear, from presence instead of performance, from alignment instead of ambition. And that shift changes everything. Suddenly, your actions no longer stem from proving your worth. You're no longer chasing something or trying to avoid something. You begin to live more simply, more quietly, more truthfully. You stop wasting energy on pretending. You stop investing in roles that aren't authentic. You begin to ask questions like, what wants to move through me today? How can I serve the highest good in this moment? What does love require of me here? These aren't abstract spiritual musings. They become your lived practice. And this practice doesn't require you to change your job, leave your family, or move to a monastery. It happens right here, in your daily life. In the way you speak to the stranger at the grocery store. In the way you forgive someone who may never say they're sorry. In the way you listen, truly listen, without waiting to respond. In the way you care for your body, your environment, your energy. In the way you choose peace over drama, stillness over noise, kindness over correctness. You may not be called to do anything spectacular by the world's standards, but your presence becomes your power, your frequency becomes your offering. You begin to notice that simply being you, fully, authentically, lovingly, is a transmission, a permission slip for others to awaken. You don't have to preach, you don't have to convince. Your vibration does the work. This is what it means to infuse the world with light. It doesn't mean shouting from the rooftops. It means being the one who holds steady in chaos, who chooses compassion when it's not deserved, who radiates calm when others are afraid, who shows up with integrity when no one's watching, who brings gentleness to moments of tension, who forgives even when they're never asked to. You become a lighthouse, not loud, not forceful, just steady, just bright, just there, so others who are still navigating the fog can find their way. You're no longer caught in the storm, you've become the calm within it. And here's what's so beautifully ironic. When you reach this place of soul maturity, when you finally stop trying to escape and instead devote yourself to embodiment, that's when your liberation is truly sealed. That's when you stop accruing karma. That's when you're no longer bound by the need to reincarnate, because you've transcended not through detachment, but through deep participation. You've learned how to be in the world without being of it. You've learned how to love without clinging, how to serve without sacrificing yourself, how to give without depleting, how to speak truth without ego, how to stand still without hiding. This is mastery, and it doesn't need a spotlight. But make no mistake, it changes the world. If you feel this call, even subtly, then something in you is already shifting. You're not waiting for life to begin anymore. You're not chasing healing as if you're broken. You're not measuring your growth by how much you achieve or how spiritual you appear. You're living, you're loving, you're softening, you're letting go, you're waking up inside your own body, your own story, your own breath. And in doing so, you're becoming the answer to prayers you don't even know are being whispered. So what now? You live your truth, quietly, boldly, without apology. You anchor peace in the middle of tension. You walk away from noise and towards stillness. You stop hiding your light just to make others comfortable. You give what you came here to give, not because you must, but because it overflows. You leave a trail of grace behind you in every room you enter. You listen more than you speak. You love more than you fear. You bless more than you judge. You start living like someone who remembers who they really are. Not a body, not a name, not a personality, but a soul, a frequency, a spark of the infinite. And whether this is your last life or not, that truth is the only one that matters. Because the end of the cycle isn't about leaving Earth, it's about transforming your relationship to it. It's about becoming the embodiment of light inside a world that desperately needs it. It's about walking with such presence, such clarity, such compassion, that you no longer need to teach anyone anything. You simply are. And your being is enough. If this is your last life, then let it be full of grace. Let it be full of truth. Let it be full of love that leaves no residue, only echoes. Not because you're trying to ascend, but because you've already arrived. What if I told you that graduation doesn't always come with celebration? That sometimes the most profound transitions happen in silence, without fanfare, without announcement. You don't always realize you're crossing a threshold until you're already on the other side. And what if that's exactly what's happening to you now, not as an idea, but as an unfolding truth? A quiet return, a soul remembering its way home. There's a stillness that begins to grow inside you when your time here draws to a close, not in the literal sense, but in the deeper sense. The soul begins to release its grip, like a bird no longer clinging to the branch. Not because it's escaping, but because it knows how to fly. There is no resistance anymore, no frantic searching, no hunger for something more. There's just presence, spaciousness, peace. The journey that once felt so urgent now feels like something sacred you're watching with reverence, not rushing to complete. This is the quiet graduation. It doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like forgiveness. It looks like waking up and no longer needing anything to be different in order to feel whole. It looks like walking through the same world, but breathing differently, seeing differently, being differently. You begin to experience the world not through the lens of identity, but through the eyes of the soul. And that's when something incredible begins to happen. The outside loses its grip on the inside. You find yourself less interested in comparison, competition, even ambition, not because you don't care, but because you're no longer measuring your worth by the old metrics. You're not trying to win the game. You've realized the game was never the point. Presence was, surrender was, love was. You may feel an inner softening, a kind of spiritual exhale that tells you, it's done, not in a way that implies giving up, but in a way that acknowledges something has completed its course. The lesson has been integrated. The cycle has been closed. You're no longer repeating the pattern. You're resting in the wisdom that came from it. It's subtle, often unnoticed by others, but unmistakable to the soul. You start sensing the return not as a destination, but as a vibration. Home is no longer a place you long to go. It's a frequency you begin to live from. It shows up in your stillness, in your kindness, in your ability to let go, gently, without regret. You don't carry wounds like badges anymore. You carry light, the light of understanding, of compassion, of transcendence. And the soul knows. The soul knows when it no longer needs earth as a mirror. It knows when the lessons have been fully embodied, not just understood, but lived. It knows when the echoes of karma have finally gone silent. And it knows when the last act of service is simply to let your final days here, however many there are, ripple out in frequency, in truth, in love, so that others may find their own way too. This is not about death, this is about completion. This is not about retreat, this is about returning to yourself, to source, to the deep, unmoving center that was never lost, only hidden beneath layers of learning and longing and becoming. And in this final chapter of your soul's earth story, you're not called to strive, you're called to embody, to walk as one who remembers, not to prove anything, not to be followed, but simply to reflect the light of home in everything you touch. You find yourself moved by things that once passed by unnoticed. The way sunlight lands on water, the quiet ache of beauty, the softness of people trying their best, the miracle of still being here, breathing, feeling, awakening. These are the signs of the return. Not outward signs, inward ones. Your soul begins to weep, not from sadness, but from recognition, from awe. From that moment when you realize the divine isn't coming, it's already here, and it's you. You are the spark returning to the flame. And the flame is not somewhere else, it's inside you. Every sacred tradition speaks of this return, not to a heaven above, but to a wholeness within. The final life is not a reward for being good. It's the natural unfolding of a soul that has remembered its origin. And the moment that remembrance stabilizes, reincarnation is no longer necessary. Not because life is a punishment, but because it has served its purpose. You've learned what it means to hurt and heal, to seek and find, to fall and rise, to forget and remember. And now you're resting in the center of all that knowing, not grasping, not waiting, not fearing. You're living in the still point. You're breathing in the pause between lifetimes. You're not lost. You're home. The love that once felt distant now surrounds you in every breath. The guidance that once seemed hidden now rises from within your own heart. The path that once seemed long and winding now reveals itself to have been leading you back to yourself all along. This is the soul's quiet graduation. No applause, no ceremony, just the deepest kind of peace. You may find that in this space, you're drawn to simplicity, to solitude, to beauty, to silence, not as a rejection of the world, but as a celebration of it. You don't need much anymore, because you have everything already, within you, around you, through you. And when the time truly comes, whenever that may be, you won't leave with fear. You'll leave like a wave returning to the ocean, like light returning to light, like a soul returning not to some distant place, but to the infinite truth that it never left. So if you feel this stirring within, if you sense the quiet ending, the gentle unraveling, the deep inner knowing that this may be your final earth life, then don't wait. Live as if you remember. Love as if nothing is owed to you. Give without losing yourself. And let your life be the soft landing of a soul returning home.